we've heard lots of confusion right now, lots of conflicting reports about what's happening in Algeria. What do we know at this hour?
Well, a lot of confusing reports, to be honest. It's a very big complex. People should remember this. It's like 40 square kilometers. And there's the gas field, and there's the place where people live, and then there's the sort of office structure. And presumably, Algerian armed forces are going through the entire structure, which is huge, seeking out the last hostage takers and trying to find hostages. Now, that's the presumption. It's clearly not ended yet. And having just talked to French officials, they are not clear at all about what the results are, what the numbers are, who's dead, who's living, how many. It's really quite an extraordinary situation.
David Cameron also voiced a lot of frustration that the Algerians had not actually consulted with other countries who have citizens in the hostage situation before they went in. Why this outrage?
Well, why Cameron would be outraged? The Algerians, as people know, are very, very protective of their sovereignty. It's part of the post-colonial experience. It's part of the civil war they had themselves in 1992 against what became an Islamist movement that these hostage takers participated in. So the Algerians are very sensitive to the issue of Islamist terrorism and very sensitive to outside interference by foreigners also.
These terrorists have threatened to go after all the oil and gas installations in Algeria. That's a lot. Are companies right now fearful, or are they changing the way they do business, or are planning for all these massive installations that are all over the country? Can they be secured?
It's very, very difficult. Some of them are already pulling foreigners out. Companies tend to get very nervous, and as soon as some terrible thing happens, they tend to disappear for a while. So that, I think, is really a big problem for Algeria, which is one of the reasons that they wanted to put this hostage-taking down so quickly and perhaps so violently to really other companies. The Algerians are really in charge of things because, as you know, oil and gas is a really, really important part of the Algerian economy.
And can you explain for us the connection now between Algeria and Mali? Because we've said that this is some of the terrorist spokespeople have said that this is in retaliation for the French action intervening militarily in Mali. Can you explain that connection?
Well, that's what they say, and the people who carried out the raid in Algeria claim they were from Mali. Were not, and the man working was a commander in Mali and is believed to be based there. But most people think, looking at how well prepared this operation was and the skill involved, that it was planned a long time ago, and that the connection to Mali is more rhetorical, that they're using it as a sort of pretext to have popularity among other Arabs, but that this was intended to be a spectacular hostage-taking that would kind of show off the strength of this group, which is basically new. It had split off from Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb only late last year.
And what can you tell us about the leader, Mokhtar Belmokhtar? You actually wrote a profile of him in today's paper. Is he more of a jihadist, long-time association with Al-Qaeda, or more of a gangster, also long-term association with smuggling?
Well, I think he's actually more of a jihadist, to be honest. The way you finance jihad, it's not like, there are lots of rich people out in the desert whom you could tax, that they do a certain amount of that. They've been making money through kidnapping, some of them spectacular, and ransoms, and also through smuggling of cigarettes. There's a lot of talk that at least some of these groups have been smuggling a lot of drugs, where Latin American drug producers have found a new route to Europe through Western Africa, and that these groups have made lots of money by smuggling drugs this way. So in a way, it's both. I mean, I suppose people who think he's doing the right thing would say he's a kind of Robin Hood, but there are elements of criminality, which is one of the reasons why he was apparently tossed out of Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb late last year. There was a feeling that he'd settled too easily into local patterns and returned to smuggling, and that this was bad for the image of Al-Qaeda.
So, a final question. Does this prove now, for those who might have had doubts, that North Africa, traditionally in the French sphere of influence, actually is strategically important to the United States?
Well, we'll see. I mean, the Americans have been very slow, partly because I think they don't want to get too involved. But they were talking for a time. We had a story in the paper that made it seem that American officials, weren't quite sure why the French were so upset, even though the French and the Americans had been discussing and supporting this initiative in the United Nations to have a slower process, backed mostly by African troops, to restore the integrity of Mali. But I think, even Washington knows that if all of Mali had been taken over by Al-Qaeda and the Islamic Maghreb and its allies, which is really what the French feared, this was hardly going to be a good thing for American security. One didn't need a Somalia on both sides of Africa.